In this video, I'll be sharing my initial impressions of the new BFG Trail Terrain all-terrain tires that I've been running on this little Suzuki for the last several months. When I was putting together this budget soft rotor build with this little Vitara, I spent a lot of time trying to decide on what budget all-terrain to commit to. A large part of the $1,500 total budget I had set was going towards the tires, so I wanted to get the most out of a tire that I could, while leaving some room for other things as well. After going through several ideas, I was surprised and excited to see that BFG had announced the new Trail Terrain all-terrain tire, and that it was soon going to be available at dealers. I saw a lot of things I liked in the tire: a respectable name brand, 3-peak winner rating, the siping looked a lot better than BFG's own renowned KO2 tire, and of course it's quite a bit cheaper than the same size KO2 as well. So I put in my order at Discount Tire, and soon I had them mounted up. Now I did do a slight comparison to the KO2s, but these are not exactly direct competition. These tires are specifically designed for light-duty crossovers, SUVs, Subarus, things of that nature. So that's exactly how I'm going to test these tires, on your typical soft roading conditions. Let's talk about how they perform on pavement. Honestly, they're great. It's almost as simple as that. This Suzuki has literally no sound deadening, just carpet straight to bare metal, and I cannot hear any droning or rumbling coming from these tires, something I couldn't quite say about the new Nitto Nomad Grapplers I tested a couple months ago. The traction is as good in the dry as you would expect from any roadworthy tire, but now that fall is here and we've finally gotten some rain to show up, I have yet to lose any traction on the wet pavement, pulling out onto the highway or things like that, and something that especially impressed me was the braking ability in the wet. I actually had an incident a couple weeks ago where I had to stab the brakes pretty hard when a car in front of me stopped suddenly. And even with no ABS on a wet road, there was no skidding or sliding at all. And that's what really sold me on these tires as a competent road tire, and not just an off-road tire that kind of makes some compromises. Now for the next and probably most common terrain you'll be driving your soft rotors on: gravel. I spent a good amount of time so far driving on gravel roads and washboards, and I really can't find anything to complain about. Probably the biggest compliment I can give these tires when it comes to gravel is that they don't seem to have a tendency to pick up small rocks or get gravel stuck in the tread, so you're not driving home with that annoying tick, 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 tick from a piece of gravel that's just stuck in your tread. As far as traction goes, obviously it's much easier to break traction on a looser surface like gravel or sand, but if you have any amount of control over your right foot, that's an easy thing to avoid. I'm also a big advocate of using your four-wheel drive if you have it. If I'm cruising on a main gravel forest road, especially one that has blind corners, washboards, etc., I'm using my four-wheel drive. You have much more control and ability to make maneuvers to avoid animals or other vehicles. It's really silly to not use something that could greatly improve your safety. Anyway, yeah, they do well in the gravel. How about snow? It did take me a while to eventually find some decent patches of snow to drive through. I wasn't busting through snowbanks or plowing fresh powder. It was wet, slushy, slippery, icky kind of snow, from about 4 to maybe 10 inches deep in places. I drove through a few times in and out of four-wheel drive. Obviously, the performance in four-wheel drive was better, and while I did experience some slipping and sliding, managed to not get stuck or have to break out my traction boards at all. But I was also alone and had no intention of getting stuck on purpose or trying to find the limit. I did mount my action camera down by the tires, and to my eyes, they did a decent job at clearing the tread and not completely packing full of snow and turning into drag slicks. Also, they are 3-peak rated, which means that they went through a bit more of a thorough test for winter safety than I can do by myself playing in this big patch of snow on this hilltop. So with that, I would be quite confident in driving up a mountain pass in the snow with these tires and my four-wheel drive. I do kind of wish that the Suzuki had ABS though. Like, what were they thinking making that an optional extra in 2004? I felt like I couldn't put this video out with at least one more terrain test, so we headed out to the coast to do some casual beach driving like many people out here do on a normal weekend outing. Now to be fair, successfully driving on a beach or in the sand, has a lot more to do with, first, knowing what you're doing, as well as the relationship between the tire's width and overall height, as well as sidewall height, and the tire's ability to create a nice long footprint when aired down. And yes, long footprint, not wide. So things like different tread patterns between different all-terrain tires play less of a factor than you might think. That said, these tires are 225/75/16s, and I aired down to about 15 psi and hit the sand, trying to drive on the hard stuff and the soft sand farthest up away from the water, and I had zero issues. Now, it does help that this is a relatively light vehicle, and it is four-wheel drive with okay ground clearance, so it's well equipped for this kind of casual beach driving as it is. But for what it's worth, we did do some hard stops to try and push a wall of sand in front of the tires and get going again, and the Suzuki just hopped right over and went on its way. So perhaps I'll have to strap an orange flag to it and actually hit the dunes to find the limits of it. Now, these tires in this size don't have the biggest sidewall, so that will limit the footprint I'm able to get out of them when aired down, but I am pleased with how the day went, driving around on the sand and the beach and just kind of having a good time. Unlike the Tesla and even a giant motorhome that we saw buried up to their bellies in the sand. Remember what I said about knowing what you're doing? Yeah, that really is important. Now you might be wondering about the rock crawling ability. I honestly haven't had a chance to find an appropriate kind of trail that I would take the Suzuki on to test that. Maybe we'll get back to the Oregon backcountry discovery route or something like that, because the rock crawling trails at our closest off-road parks seem like they might be a death sentence for this little Vitara. So we'll see what comes, probably after this winter. So what's my overall opinion so far? I really like these tires. However, I wouldn't call them my favorite all-terrain that I've had experience with. That would probably have to go to the Falken Wildpeak AT3W or the AT Trail for a tire that fits into this lighter duty role more accurately. But they are a solid choice for anyone who wants to save a little money over something like the KO2 maybe, or even the Falcons that I mentioned earlier. But they still play their role as a double duty on-off-road performance tire quite well. If you like to follow along with the rest of our adventures, make sure to subscribe, and to make sure you don't miss out on any other videos, click the notification bell as well.